Hello and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to another episode from my Origins beer series. If you're not familiar, my Origins beer series is basically me taking a look back at beers that are still available now that influenced my kind of love for beer very much many years ago. And this is definitely one of them. Now, I have talked a bit about this on the channel before. I've definitely drank it in live streams before, and I've even kind of reviewed it in that I compared it against its big brother, the kind of Grand Reserve Plum Porter. But of course, this is Titanic Plum Porter. I think it's pretty well known at this point. I'm not sure if it's available nationwide in supermarkets, but it's certainly available in every supermarket in my area. The Titanic Brewery are from Stoke-on-Trent, which are kind of not necessarily East Midlands, but still very much in the Midlands. They are one of our, I guess, bigger brewers that are still considered somewhat small and craft-like. Just before we get into this though, I think my journey with this beer started somewhere around the very early 2010s, probably 2012-ish, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's quite late, relatively speaking, in my beer story. I would have been, well, early to mid-20s at that point, and I've had quite a thing about different beers for a very long time, even since before I was probably meant to. But yeah, so, I mean, it's a plum-infused porter. What else do you need to know, really? Let's get into it. But just before we crack this open, here is a quick look at the bottle. I feel like the design on this might have changed a bit. I feel like it was more of a centered around the logo design in years past, but overall, the general aesthetic of this beer hasn't really changed a lot. As you'd expect with a lot of these type of larger brand beers, there is quite a lot of info on the back there, which we'll get into later, but otherwise, it's still a very nifty looking bottle. That I do really like the way they've updated that design. It's still classic, but distinctly modern as well. Even on the opening, you get a nice just whiff of that super rich plummy goodness. In the glass then, well, you've got to remember this is a porter and not a stout, and to be honest, this beer I think is still the benchmark I view most porters by in terms of the visuals. I mean, if I hold it up to the glass, there's a nice beautiful red hue just coming in across the bottom of the glass there, but otherwise you can, with a very powerful light behind it, it has a distinctly red hue, but in a dull environment it's pretty much pitch black. So it is a bit of a change up with the light, this one. I'll see if I can put a light up behind it to show you exactly what I mean. Here we go then. You can see there with my phone light mincing behind it. It is definitely a really deep red beer that just, as you shine a light on it, yeah, starts to change quite a bit. Now it's been in the glass a moment, it does have a kind of a just shy of a one finger off-white head to it, but the conditioning looks reasonable, and yeah, to be honest, it's been a few months since I've had one of these. I'm pretty eager to get into it. So, the aromas. Big, juicy plums, which is definitely a sign back that will get taken out of context, but super sweet, super fruity, distinctly plum, distinctly stone fruit, and almost has a candied fruit sweetness to it. It really does come across very sweet on the nose, this. It's very cakey, puddingy, figgy pudding, that whole breadth of, well, I guess dark fruits in sweet treats, I guess. But whilst it does smell sweet, it doesn't smell sickly. It doesn't smell too rich. It's got a distinct freshness to it, which, to be honest, a porter should have. A porter should be slightly more hopped than a stout. So whilst actual hop character is very difficult to pull out of this because of that massive plum presence. That sounds like a character from something, but I'm not sure what. Maybe an off-brand version of Cluedo, maybe. But yeah, it has a freshness to it that, oh yeah, I just want to get into it. I really do. Right then, let's do this. Nearly dropped it. Cheers. Wow. Right. Now then. Oh. I said in the previous video, the Hobgoblin review, that it was like this distinct, almost harsh but not over the top bitterness that's very reminiscent of old school classic British ale. And this, there you go, nearly knocked it over twice. This does the same thing. Right, I better hurry up and review it properly given my apparent insistence on knocking this beer out of the glass. So, Well, it is bright, it is fresh. Actually, there is a bit of hop character in there in the background. Obviously, very plum forward, but good roastiness, good bitterness as well. A few sharp edges, a bit thin on the body, but you know, when we get into this mass-produced area, it's kind of what we expect. The standout feature of this beer for me, though, has always been that slight lingering sweet fruit aftertaste. It's nowhere near as sweet as it was on the aroma, but it just kind of wants to keep you going back because of that very refreshing bitter bite that it's got right in the middle of the beer. So you sat there with that big sweet aftertaste, your mouth's not kind of ruining the bitterness as it does with some very bitter only beers, which means you instantly just want to go back and experience it all again, which is inevitably always a charm. And then, yeah, on the end, again, goes back to being sweet, which lines you up again for another glorious mouthful. Right then, let's do a top to bottom taste test so you can really understand everything I'm talking about. The head has pretty much disappeared now. I'll try and keep it moving around the glass just to liven it back up just a little bit. So, initially, spritzy, not very bitter, slightly sweet, slightly fruity on the very front of the tongue. That second face is almost kind of a cutting moment. It's a bit bitter, but not overly. It's got some very refreshing notes in there. And there might even be a little bit of sweeter citrus, sweet orange, that kind of a thing. It's very mild, but it does just, I guess, refresh the palate to set you up again for some big, intense, bold, deep, rich flavour. Middle phase, also a little bit of hop character starting to fill in. It's quite green hop, actually. It's not very strong. It's really, you got to dig around to find it a bit, but it is in there, but it is subtle. And then on the swallow, seems a bit thin, to be honest. It's undoubtedly quite sweet. Not overly though, has to be said. And then as soon as you have swallowed it, that's where the show really begins with this beer, to be honest. You get a lingering bitterness that makes you go, oh, we're in proper beer territory here. This is not a plum smoothie masquerading as beer by any means. And then as you take just a step back, your airways just become filled with this beautifully sweet plummy aroma. Maybe I should have called the channel the Plummy Beard. Anyway, so yeah, that is it really. It's a really changeable beer, is what I will say though. And after we've had a quick look at this bottle, I'll go into exactly what I mean. On the front then, Titanic Brewery, 4.9% plum porter. It's fruity, red and deep, according to them. I think we can agree with that. And on the back, it goes on to say, plum porter, if you had suggested our best-selling multi-award winning beer would have been a dark, fruit-flavoured and 4.9% 3 years ago, we would have said you were mad. That was before our brewers really understood the dark, fruity arts. I don't think they've updated their print work in a while. Because I'm pretty confident this has been their best-selling beer for a lot longer than 3 years. So, interesting. It says tasting notes are well-rounded porter with fruity, sweet notes over a backdrop of hoppy flavour, deep red in colour, and surprisingly easy drinking for a full-flavoured beer. A few points there we'll come back to in a moment. Visually, it's described as deep red. The aroma is decided as plum, raisin, and fruity. Yes, absolutely. And the taste is soft, plum, vanilla. 3 separate things there, not soft plums. Nobody wants soft plums. But yeah, it's got a 1.5 out of 5 bitterness rating and a 3.5 out of 5 sweetness rating. Again, I'm going to come back to that in a second. The ingredients are water, malted barley, wheat hops, natural plum flavouring, and yeast. Bit dubious on a natural plum flavouring. Would have preferred whether it's puree, whatever it is. I just want to know what's in it. I like it regardless. We've also got a breakdown of the malts, which are Maris Otter, Pearl, Wheat, and Dark Crystal. And the hops are Pilgrim, Hercules, Goldings, and Celia. Not familiar with Celia, other than obviously having had it in this a few times. It's got all their info, their address in Stoke-on-Trent, website, titanicbrewery.co.uk, socials, all that sort of stuff. 2.5 UK units in this 500ml bottle. Yeah, that's it. So, I said this beer seems quite changeable, and that is only something that I really can attest to, having drank it quite frequently over many, many years now. The other thing is I want to pick up on some of those kind of see, smell, taste notes that are on here and the bitterness and sweetness rating. So we've got no issue with the visual deep red. The smell, plum, raisin and fruity. Again, pretty much what we went for. Taste, soft plum vanilla. And this is where this beer maybe has a problem, because I've had this in many different bottles and on many different formats. I've had it on tap, I've had it on cask, everything. And it doesn't seem to be kind of, it used to be good and now it's not, or anything like that. It's just a little bit inconsistent. So I've had absolutely diabolical pints of this on a cask. So if you sat there thinking, Tom, why are you raving about this beer? I've had it, it's awful. No, it's not. Just sometimes it can be. And that is a bit of a difficulty. When it says soft plum and vanilla, when you have a pint of this on hand pull that's genuinely very good, it is an astounding beer. It is an incredible experience, and if I see it on cask, I'm almost always going to order it, just in case it happens to be one of those occasions. And when it is like that, it's super soft, super velvety, and slightly sweeter than I'm experiencing here, which is not always a good thing, but trust me, it does just work. And when it is that kind of sweet, velvety beer, you do get a kind of a vanilla-y kick, but I'm not getting it today out of this bottle, and it's pretty much always the same with the bottles. And it's even worse if you get a bad cask version. The bottles are kind of like the halfway house. It's always reasonable, so worth buying, but it's never terrible. Whereas the cask can be a little bit one way or the other. That goes on to what I was saying about the bitterness rating being 1.5 out of 5. This beer feels more bitter than that to me today. Maybe it's a result of what I've eaten today. I don't know. I've not really eaten anything in the last 3 hours, 4 hours, so it's unlikely to be that. But hey, who knows? So yeah, right now I think that bitterness rating is wrong. I think it's more like 2.5, 3 out of 5 rather than 1.5. But hey, to be fair, the sweetness 3.5 out of 5. Yes, absolutely right now, and it has got that nice hoppy backbone as they discussed. And as I've been doing with this series, giving a little bit of history to this beer, and more for my benefit than anything really. So Titanic Brewery were founded in 1985. Stoke-on-Trent, all the information we already know. It says Titanic's beers are generally notable for their light colour, low malt and high hop content, giving a very dry, bitter base, although Captain Smith's and some of their more seasonal beers are dark and malty, though still extremely hoppy. Interesting to note. I think that one. I have to say there isn't a huge amount of information out there about them or this beer that's really of note here. However, I can tell you this. Titanic's Plum Porter has become a cult classic since being released as a winter speciality beer back in 2011. So, I'm not saying I drank it as soon as it came out, but it definitely wasn't long after. And with that, you're probably thinking, Tom, why is this such a hype beer for you? Why is it kind of part of your origin beer story? Well, I just have really nice memories with this beer. It's in those sorts of very trad, very winter cosy pub situations with friends and family, which is just every so often this would come on and it always just made it that much better experience really. And that I guess is why it's come up as the second beer in my Origin series. Yeah, a lot of good memories, just about old enough to get away with it in the Origin series, and well, I still think, to be honest, it is a very, very good beer. Not without its flaws, as we're discovering with most beers, and I suspect we will continue in this series, but it's a bit thin. It might be a bit too bitter than intended in this particular instance. But at the same time, for the cost per volume, I mean, you could do a lot worse. And that is all I've got to say about it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like it. If you haven't already subscribed, if you will be so kind. And I'll catch you next time. Cheers.